Jahanache, Tanse, hello. Thank you for watching. This video, created specifically for Blueberry River First Nations community members, explains the history, present, and future of TRL, the Treaty Rights Litigation case. This video also focuses on the implementation agreement announced in January 2023 by Blueberry River First Nations and the province of BC. This video explains the agreement's new rules for land protection, stronger rules to preserve ecosystem values, new wildlife management regime, and land restoration programs and initiatives. This video is designed to accompany the TRL Member Infobook. While watching this video, it may be helpful to have a copy of the book in hand, as it includes a series of maps and a key terms glossary, both designed to help Blueberry members better understand TRL and the implementation agreement. Also, watch out for these icons while watching the video. They highlight areas where members can be involved in planning or where relevant member stories are told. Each member story is based on affidavits and testimonies given during the Wuujǫ versus British Columbia court case, edited lightly for clarity. What is TRL? In 2015, Blueberry River First Nations launched a lawsuit in the BC Supreme Court against the province. The focus of this case from the very beginning was always on the protection of our treaty rights and the protection of the land. We sued the BC government in the hopes of protecting our territory from further overdevelopment, changing the way government makes decisions on industrial permitting, establishing co-management of resources, so Blueberry has a say on how the lands on our traditional territory are managed, and implementing ecosystem-based management of our territory and the lands and water in it. We were heading into the unknown. It was a do-or-die situation that had never been attempted before. But we knew we had to take a stand for our future generations, that there was no more time to spare, and that bold moves were needed to enact change. This court case and the later implementation agreement are known as Treaty Rights Litigation, or TRL. Denezaw and Cree people have lived here since time immemorial, for generations and generations, stretching back beyond memory and recorded history, and long before the first Europeans and settlers came to our area. Treaty 8 was first signed at Slave Lake in 1899, and our Blueberry ancestors entered into Treaty 8 with the Crown in 1900. They agreed that they would allow some settlement to occur in some parts of our territory, but that our way of life would not be interfered with against our will. Our ancestors knew then, as we know now, that our ability to hunt, trap, fish, and carry out our traditional ways, such as making moose hide and dry meat, and camping throughout our territory, depends upon healthy forests, healthy wildlife, and clean water. The treaty stated that our ancestors have the right to continue with our way of life for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. In other words, we and our children will have these rights forever. Over time, however, the government allowed more and more development to occur in our territory, expecting us to adopt the settlers' way of life and become farmers. Our people were displaced, pushed aside, forced to always hunt somewhere else over and over again. It started with agricultural development, then forestry, oil and gas development, hydro, roads, and other developments which destroyed the lands we relied upon. Our hunting areas were lost. The wildlife were fewer and unhealthy. The water was not fit to drink. We warned the government over and over again that our way of life was under threat from the cumulative effects of all of this development, but the government kept approving more and more development. Blueberry's hands were tied. The province had a mandate to develop the resources in our territory, and there was no mechanism for us to stop it. Member Stories, Raymond Apa. That land is how we raise our kids. What the elders taught us, you cannot take that away from us, what we were taught. We depend on wildlife. We depend on everything, even the plants. If that land is destroyed, where do we go? How are we going to teach our young, our future generations, our youngest ones? How do we teach our grandchildren? Where do you take them? There's clear cuts and roads all over the place. Raymond Apa was born in 1960 and grew up on Blueberry's old reserve. He has spent time hunting on the land every year since he was young. He was taught how to live on the land, how to hunt, and where to look for game by his elders, Charlie Yahay, John Yahay, Tamapaw, and Angus Davis. Countless times we told the government that development was affecting our ability to practice our treaty rights, but demonstrating to the government that our treaty rights were being infringed upon was never enough, and the government never changed its ways. Never once, in issuing hundreds and hundreds of development permits over decades, did the government ever turn down an application because of the concerns we raised about our treaty rights. So, Blueberry sued the government in the BC Supreme Court for breaching the treaty promise and the Canadian Constitution, and we won. And so, with that win, Blueberry and BC are working together to implement the court's decision, to uphold the promises of Treaty 8, and to protect the land that we have left for the benefit of our future generations. The implementation agreement between Blueberry and the province was announced with the BC government on January 18, 2023. Blueberry and the province are working together to ensure Blueberry's treaty rights are protected, new measures are implemented, and planning is underway to restore and heal the land. Member Stories, Caden Pyle. Every time I go out with my father, I always learn something new. He's taught me how to navigate from the trees. He showed me how to live off the land, what to eat, what not to eat, and where to sleep, what to sleep with if I'm ever stuck there, where to go. And those things I have learned and carried with me ever since, he's taught me. And every time I go out with him, we go hunting, and I always learn something new. Caden Pyle was born in 2003 and was the youngest Blueberry member who testified at the court case. His parents are Sherry Dominic and Stanley Guy Pyle. He testified about how he learned to hunt and fish from his father, who, along with his mother and other relatives, has been taking him camping and fishing since he was a baby. To learn more about other important milestones on our TRL journey, please see the TRL timeline in the TRL Infobook. The Implementation Agreement is a detailed legal document. For the purposes of this book, we have summarized the most important information for members into 5 sections: protection, stronger rules, co-management of wildlife, restoration, and revenue sharing. Protection of large areas of our territory from new industrial developments in the future, chosen in consultation with members. These will be protected forever to support the exercise of our treaty rights. Other areas where development can occur are also protected by stronger rules to preserve ecosystem values, to protect old forest, water, wildlife habitat, and mineral licks, and to let the land recover. Blueberry will co-manage wildlife with the BC government to make sure that external hunting pressures are not too great, habitat is protected, and moose populations are allowed to recover. Restoration will be a major focus immediately and over the coming years, with Blueberry setting the standards for restoration, and Blueberry choosing the priority areas for restoration as identified by members. Revenue sharing and other financial agreements for Blueberry to ensure that we too prosper from the development that does occur in our territory. Before Blueberry even went to trial, we were trying to get our lands protected through negotiations with the government. In 2019, our Lands Department began working with Blueberry families to identify priority areas for the practice of treaty rights via the Regional Strategic Environmental Assessment Project, RSEA. In September 2021, after Blueberry won the TRL court case, the nation's Lands Department engaged again with members in order to decide which areas to focus on for the highest levels of protection, now that we were in a position to implement the court's direction that our treaty rights must be protected. The areas which were decided upon were selected based on the lands identified by members as being culturally important and vital to exercising our treaty rights. Member Stories, Jerry Davis. Dancing Grounds is the place where all the dreamers meet at the same time. And from halfway to, a bunch of people went. From Prophet River, a bunch of people went. And from Doig. They all have a big gathering at one time for the summer. They call it Dancing Grounds. When they are singing, people dance. Just from dancing, they dug the ground very deep. That's why they call it dancing grounds. And it's very important for us to save that place. When we go in there, we have to be like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like when you go into court, you've got to be quiet. That's how it is to us. Gerald Jerry Davis was born in 1954 at Aitken Creek, mile 26 on the Beaton River Road. He is the son of Margaret and Pete Davis and the grandson of Charlie Hay, the last of the Blueberry Dreamers. He is married to Alvina Davis with 5 children, and he is an elder in the community. He has worked as a guide outfitter, a farm hand, and a trapper. He is one of the people in the community who teaches the younger generation how to hunt and trap today. Blueberry and BC have agreed on how to protect parts of our territory from further extensive development. In these areas, the land will be allowed to heal, and large parts of our territory will be healthy for future generations to practice their treaty rights. We are now developing plans for better land management, and we now have a say in decisions on protecting the land. Some of the protections are in place immediately, while other areas for protection need to be discussed and decided upon together by Blueberry and BC. This is important planning work that Blueberry members need to be involved in. There are 3 types of areas of land within our territory that will be under new protection to restore and support our treaty rights. Critical cultural areas, also called high-value areas or HV1 in the agreement, identified by Blueberry members as being the highest priority areas for protection. Trap lines and Forest Reserve and Recovery Areas, or FRRAs. Protection from forestry. All critical cultural areas, trap lines, and FRRA areas will be protected from new clear cuts unless Blueberry agrees otherwise. Also, all old forests can't be cut to allow them to recover to natural conditions. Critical cultural areas. There are 3 categories of these high-value areas, also called HV1 areas. HV1A, highest level of protection from new development, 100% of area protected from new oil and gas development and new forestry activity, even where there are existing development footprints. Existing operations will be wound down at the end of their useful life. HV1B, 80% of the area protected as large continuous areas free from new development. Some HV1B areas will transition to 100% protection as HV1A. This will be done through the planning process with member input. HV1C, 60% of the area will be protected as large continuous areas free from new development. Blueberry will work with BC to develop the plans and the maps showing where the protected areas within HV1B and HV1C will be, and what the rules will be to control the development that is allowed in the remaining 20% HV1B or 40% HV1C so that it has less impact. Member stories. Norma Pyle. I remember in maybe 96 or 97, I came back to Blueberry and my brother and I went out and he said, let's go hunting. So we headed up the Beaton Airport Road and he said, well, let's go down mile 31. So I'm driving and I ended up driving right past the road. And he said, what's the matter with you? You drove past the road. And I said, oh, really? But the problem for me was that there were so many new roads and clear cuts and pipelines along that area. I couldn't recognize mile 31 road because it had changed. Back in my day, it was just a small 1-lane road. Now it could accommodate 2 logging trucks passing each other. It was a very different road, and it was hard for me to recognize. There were so many roads. It was unrecognizable. The whole country had changed. Norma Pyle was born in 1972 and grew up at Buick Creek, where she lived until she was 14. Her mother, Alice Pyle, was born at Horsetrack on the Saconnie River, and her father, Amos Pyle, was born in Castor, Alberta, but his family moved to the Buick Creek area in the 1930s. Norma is one of 11 children. Stanley, Guy Pyle, is her older brother, and Caden Pyle is her nephew. There is lots of planning to do to select the protected areas in HV1Cs and HV1Bs, and lots of community engagement happening and still to come. Preserving ecosystem values outside of protected areas. There are still important limits on the development that can be done to our territory, even outside of protected areas. The agreement changes the way the government makes decisions in the whole of our territory. In non-protected areas that are possible sites for development, the following new rules apply. No more harvesting of old forest in our core territory to allow forests to recover to natural conditions. Elimination of herbicide use, except with blueberry consent. Development cap, a 50% permanent reduction of the overall level of new industrial disturbance allowed each year for oil and gas development in our territory. Each area, including Blueberry's core areas, are protected by specific development caps to avoid over-disturbance. Setback and protection rules for any new oil and gas development. 1 kilometer setbacks from cabins, 500-meter setback from campsites, spiritual areas, medicinal plant areas, 250-meter setbacks from mineral licks, wallows, cultural trails, 30 to 100-meter setbacks from streams. Avoid high-value moose habitat. We have a lot of planning with our members ahead on the more detailed mapping of the areas for absolute protection. Please look out for opportunities for community engagement during the coming planning process. As part of the agreement, we are creating plans in the following watersheds. Blueberry River Watershed, including part of the Middle Beaten River Watershed west of the Beaten River, Upper Beaten River Watershed, and Lower Sakonnie Chief River Watershed. We are also doing more detailed planning of smaller areas within these watersheds, including HV1C Grizzly Creek Complex and HV1C Upper Halfway plans, completed by BC and Blueberry April 2025. HV1B plans and identifying the 2 to 3, which will move up to 100% protection, to be completed by July 31st, 2025. Planning is taking place now and will continue. Members' input is critical at these planning stages. Look out for opportunities for community engagement on the Blueberry website during the planning process. As the court stated clearly in the ruling, Blueberry's way of life is dependent on the existence of healthy, mature forests, wildlife habitats such as mineral licks, fresh, clean water, and access to these places. The following will now apply. Blueberry and BC will co-manage wildlife in our territory. An example of what this will look like: reviewing and determining limited entry hunts within our territory. We will have a wildlife working group including representation from Blueberry, BC, and a jointly appointed biologist. We will be developing a long-term moose management and inventory program that uses both our traditional knowledge and Western science to re-establish healthy and sustainable moose populations that support our way of life. For now, existing moose hunting restrictions on non-Indigenous hunters will remain in place for the 2023 to 2024 seasons, and if there is no increase in the moose populations, Blueberry and BC will work on solutions, including extending the hunting restrictions and targeted moose habitat protection. Other wildlife measures: we will work together on predator control, grizzly bear management, and support for recovery of caribou herds. We will co-develop cultural burn plans to promote wildlife habitat and support our treaty rights. Member stories: Lana Wolf. Moose are the main game relied upon by our people for food. Healthy moose are very hard to find in our territory now. There were good moose hunting grounds near the reserve and north of the Blueberry River near the Mile 98 road. I used to camp and hunt and fish with my father and grandfather around Blueberry Bridge on the way toward Mile 98. However, it is difficult to find moose in these areas now. There still remains good moose hunting territory further west by Pink Mountain and Lily Lake. These areas must be protected. Lana Wolf was born in 1951 in Fort St. John to parents Jack and Marianne Wolf and passed in 2021. She was a counselor for Blueberry River First Nations, lived her entire life in Blueberry territory, and was a beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend. The traditional Blueberry way of life was passed down to her from her grandparents and parents. She was one of the respected elders in the Blueberry community, responsible for passing on Blueberry's traditions to the next generation. Combining Western science with First Nations knowledge, The Wildlife Working Group is made up of representatives from Blueberry, BC, and a jointly appointed biologist. The main purpose of this group is to provide First Nations values and perspectives to wildlife management in Blueberry's territory by drawing on Blueberry members' stories and observations of the land accumulated over many decades. The group will take guidance from Blueberry land users, the original stewards of the land, who will guide and direct the group as they make recommendations for long-term sustainability for wildlife populations. Decades of industrial disturbance have fragmented ecosystems and wildlife habitat, degrading Blueberry members' ability to exercise their treaty rights. The following programs are now in place. A restoration fund will deliver joint oversight, Indigenous-led delivery, and restoration standard setting. The province is contributing $200 million to this fund by June 2025. If more funds are needed in the future to heal the land and restore important areas, Blueberry and BC will negotiate further contributions in order to complete restoration. Petroleum and natural gas-related new land disturbance fees of $60,000 per hectare in critical cultural areas and priority watershed management basin plan areas, in order to incentivize industry to avoid new disturbance. A restoration society has been set up with members of BC and Blueberry to co-manage the $200 million restoration fund and the restoration done under it. The Restoration Society administers the funding established by the province and Blueberry to manage restoration in our traditional territory. The Society has a 7-person board of directors consisting of both Blueberry and BC representatives who co-manage the funding of restoration projects. The agreement also includes financial compensation in the form of new revenue sharing, with a minimum of $73.3 million transferred to Blueberry River First Nations over the first 3 years, from 2023 to 2026. Blueberry to receive area-based replaceable forest license and oil and gas tenures in locations determined by Blueberry. Blueberry to co-develop with province a carbon offset project, with Blueberry owning the carbon credits, which are expected to produce annual revenue for the nation over the long term. Blueberry to receive additional financial support to pay for the costs of negotiating and implementing the agreement, including monies to support critical cultural area planning, developing the carbon credits project, and developing a stewardship and guardian program. Blueberry's treaty rights are all of our rights. All of us have the right to have our way of life protected under the treaty. This means the right to healthy forests and wildlife, clean water, and access to the many places our families have relied on for generations. Through the planning processes, we will be setting out the areas that need extra protection and more safeguards for any development that is proposed. Work will focus on co-developing the priority watershed management basin plans by December 31st, 2025, and planning for the different classes of high-value areas that have already been identified. Additional mapping work will be done to capture all the key cultural areas to ensure that the high-priority areas for protection are identified. This mapping work will also help fill in any gaps for data that have not been mapped yet, such as plant collection areas, moose licks, small wetlands, etc. Significant effort is being put into community engagement to create multiple opportunities for Blueberry members to provide input through the Community Advisory Group, open houses, on-the-land engagements, and family meetings. It is important that our members participate in these planning processes so that we all feel sure we are protecting the right places for our future generations. It means engagement between trapline holders and developers, supported by Blueberry's Lands Department. Trapline holders now have a voice in determining what happens in terms of land protection, guidance in development, locations, frequencies, timings, etc. It is critically important that Blueberry hears from the members who are trapline holders so that their voice is included in the decisions that are being made right now. Our nation has the right to have large areas within traplines protected from new development, and we want to make sure we identify the right areas for that protection. Input from trapline holders, as well as from other members, will be important. Additionally, companies will have to work with the Blueberry Lands Department to make sure they are engaging with trapline holders before they submit any applications for new oil and gas developments. To learn more about TRL, the implementation agreement, and find out how you can give your input, please contact the Blueberry River First Nations Reception Desk by phone at 250-630-2800, email reception@blueberryfn.ca, or visit the website at blueberryfn.ca.